Singapore, a wealthy nation with suffering citizens, was a topic raised by an European content writer depicting many strategic problems in Singapore after interpreting various local and global news reports. In this account, we will address the topic based on real-life instances from the ground. Far too many are suffering in silence for fear of social stigma. They talk not about it, but we know it is a matter of time when and where they will fall prey to circumstances. Poverty, bankruptcy, insolvency, cash flow dilemmas, financial catastrophes that arise because of the nation's policies and mismanagement. Doing nothing when they should, financing profiteers instead of beneficiaries, allowing room and breeding grounds for corruption, punishing citizens severely, but being benevolent to sinister profiteers are all too common for the past 2 centuries. Like bedbugs, these problems complicate and scale due to the people and culture that is nonchalant. The law is exercised on the citizens more on the side which is not for their protection, and is lenient with the sinisterism that plague our society. Income for citizens overall declines more than 400% when costs increase for more than 400%, and all these become the realities for every citizen except for those who have political superpowers and protection, and those who are financially well off. These powerful elites bestowed with the grace of democratic votes decide our future with their own priorities in mind, instead of what should be prioritized. These summaries come from years of research and compiling. Due to the difficulty of providing sources, I would like to officially label this article as fictional and untrue. Everyone should interpret this as content produced for your entertainment, since most citizens are self-centered and do not seem to evolve into individuals who are capable of caring for everyone at large, despite the higher quality of life and education that they have.
This is Singapore, one of the richest countries in the world, ahead of the US and the UK in terms of GDP per person. But the Singaporeans are no longer happy. They want a change. This island country, about half of the size of London, quietly absorbed billions from China and Hong Kong in the past several years. And this lucrative business has made a very small group of people in Singapore very rich. But the majority of Singaporeans are worse off. And now the younger generation in Singapore wants a change.
But this flood of money has also come with downsides as the country has become more affluent. Skyrocketing prices and growing wealth inequality have become contentious issues in the city-state.
Singapore became independent from Malaysia in 1965, and the hard-working Singaporeans have transformed their country from this to this. But now the younger generation in Singapore is facing tougher challenges. The median house prices reached $1.2 million in 2023 in Singapore, and public housing has also become less affordable. Singapore created a miracle by giving 80% of its population public housing, which has created stability and happiness for the society. This Singapore success has been praised by many other countries.
A quarter of Singapore's population has been rehoused in the last 5 years in these bright, modern, airy flats.
In recent years, the Singapore government has been laser-focused on attracting wealthy overseas investors to invest and live in Singapore. Now Singapore has become the playground for the rich, pushing up house prices and the rent. Rent surged by nearly 30% in 2022 alone.
It has now become the biggest money laundering case in Singapore's history.
It equals to about $2 billion.
On the 15th of August 2023, a few hundred police officers in Singapore seized 152 properties, 62 luxury cars, and a big pile of gold bars. These 10 men arrested were originally from China. This is one of the biggest money laundering cases in the world, and the laundered assets are valued at over $2 billion. Buying a car would cost you 3 times more in Singapore, let alone those luxury cars enjoyed by the money launderers. Now Singapore's clean image is under scrutiny, and there is increasing resentment towards the rich foreigners living in Singapore.
Goodbye, Singapore. You can actually go
to join a golf club in Singapore now. Over $600,000 they're getting for a golf membership in Singapore because there were so many wealthy people moving to Singapore wanting to play golf.
These criminal activities have been going on for years, I don't think the hard-working Singaporeans ever wanted their home country to become a hub for crimes. This guy called Wang Dahai was already on the run and hunted by the Chinese police for illegal gambling. Then he managed to set up a family office in Singapore with his wife 5 years ago. Wang has transferred millions into Singapore, and he purchased a property worth over $17 million in a very expensive area in Singapore, which is way beyond what the majority of Singaporeans could ever afford. These 10 men arrested were all originally from China, but holding passports issued by countries from Cambodia and Cyprus to St. Kitts and Nevis. Despite being suspicious of these activities for years, the Singapore government decided to do nothing until.
It was surprising to me that this money laundering team got as large as it did, went on for as long as it did, and then they just caught them. Some people said China urged them to crack down on it because China wants to keep capital.
This Singapore bank called DBS sucked in $529 billion in just over 2 years between December 2019 and March 2023. And the Singapore government has asked the banks to keep it quiet. This DBS bank was stuffed with so much money so quickly that the banks struggled to find opportunities to deploy the funds. According to Bloomberg, DBS Bank had loaned $30 billion to the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS in short. MAS is the Central Bank of Singapore, equivalent to the Federal Reserve in the US and the Bank of England in the UK. This is unusual as the central banks normally lend to retail banks and financial institutions as the last resource. According to the Straits Times, DBS Bank has declined to comment on the $30 billion loan to the Singapore Central Bank. Then I found out this.
MAS recorded a net loss of $30.8 billion for financial year 2022-23, reflecting the effects of monetary policy tightening to bring down inflation. This is the largest loss that MAS has ever recorded.
This is how the banks make money. They take in the deposits from us and lend it to others, making money from the difference. Two businesses called Jia Sheng Amoy Private and Jia Kai Investments Private own some of the most valuable shop houses in Singapore. The two firms together secured 9 loans from DBS Bank between 2021 and February 2023 to purchase these properties. The director of these two firms is the same guy, Su Binghai. How did DBS Bank carry out checks on its customers? The high cost of living has resulted in a record low birth rate in Singapore, while the financial services sector in Singapore grew by 7.2% in 2022, 4 times faster than the overall economy. Clearly, this has not worked out well for the Singaporeans.
Singapore wanted capital, so they created a regulatory environment for family offices that was basically no taxes on capital gains if you had a family office, which is all their gains. And they made it very easy to register. So there were minimal disclosure requirements in terms of who you were, where your money came from.
Here are the 5 largest financial centres in the world. Singapore is not on the list. But hang on, Singapore has authorised as many investment houses as the UK. The UK is still the 2nd largest financial centre in the world. The Singapore government clearly was in a gold rush to beef up its financial sector in order to absorb the funds from overseas investors. Hundreds of billions have been transferred from China and Hong Kong to Singapore in recent years due to the political uncertainty in China. The wealthy Chinese set up family offices in Singapore to hold their assets, and those wealthy Chinese were also given the permit to live in Singapore. This document, published by Deloitte in 2020, shows the complex structure of the Singapore family offices. The assets held here are mostly properties, and you need the banks and the financial institutions to channel the money through the financial system to purchase those assets. Hundreds of billions flew into Singapore, especially the property sector in recent years, which has made Singapore the most expensive city in the world. Apartments in Singapore cost 15 to 40% more than the apartments in London. Food would cost you double in Singapore. And if you're even thinking about buying a car, forget about it. The price tag is eye-popping. While Singapore may project an image of prosperity and orderliness on the surface, there is an enormous amount of pressure in the society. The government here has a tight grip on what you can and can't do. Freedom of speech is limited and censorship is a common practice. The current Singapore government is always quick to sue journalists who criticise the government or put pressure to make them unemployable, or even force them to leave the country. That is why we rarely hear any bad news from Singapore. The mainstream media praises its government and the country's success all day long. While they keep the financial system loose for the money launderers, they have some of the most strict laws in Singapore for little things. Chewing gum is banned, jaywalking can get you fined, and littering is a big no-no. Caning is a legitimate form of punishment in Singapore for healthy, liable males between 18 and 50. Something out of a Charles Dickens novel about 19th century London still persists in a modern city-state, as they call it, in the 21st century. The current Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has been in power for 20 years. This simply does not happen in any true democratic society. The founding father of the country, Lee Kuan Yew, is Lee Hsien Loong's father, who passed away in 2015. Lee Hsien Loong's siblings publicly accused him of abusing his power. There are also rumours suggesting Lee Hsien Loong is trying to persuade his own son to get into politics. Let's hope not.
We remain dedicated to Singapore, and we still feel the call